So I shall begin. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm here to present a paper entitled Golems or Replicants, the Life of Words as a Message of La Vie éternelle roman. La Vie éternelle roman is a 1989 novel by Jacques Attali, an economist, essayist, and very famous public figure in France. He's generally known for his essays than for his creative writing, and is a man of great erudition, and one can truly tell how his knowledge is condensed into his novels. In fact, La Vie éternelle roman is a clear example of a book that mingles different sources together, such as the Bible, the Kabbalah, history, and it goes without saying, science fiction motifs. There is unfortunately no English translation of the book, so all the quotations that I will share with you today will be in my own translation. So briefly, here's a list of the motifs that can be found in the book. This list is, of course, by no means exhaustive. So you have the Father Quest, the atomic bomb, the Shoah, the portrayal of the myths of mankind with a stress on the biblical stories and the sacred texts of Judaism, Sefer Yetzirah, Zohar, we'll see these in a moment. The golem, reincarnation, genetic codes and the creation of life, cloning, the preservation of memory and tradition, and last but certainly not least, the relationship between letters, text, and stories with eternity. So one can already see from the following two introductory mini chapters, this is the first one, that the author himself is giving us an idea of how deeply intertextual La Vie éternelle is. In the first foreword, the reader is presented with some of the hypertext that inform the narrative, whereas the second one, I hope you had time to read this for just a moment, it shows us some of the most relevant themes of the book. I see in the section that I've highlighted, three of the main motifs I will point to over and over again in my presentations are already there. So words, the ability to create copies of others, and the notion of eternal life. So you have the words capable of giving life to clay statue, that Sabbatai donor in person has succeeded in reproducing himself and still lived somewhere with some of his works, copies, I would highlight, of illustrious men. So from century to century, eternal lives will pass. Noah with the name of Noah, Joseph with the name of Jos, Jeremiah with the name of Emir, and so many others, masters of all wisdom, astounded madmen, hallucinated princesses. But the secret, if it does exist, is very well guarded, and it is transmitted from the sages to the sages, masters of words and of life. So, La Vie éternelle is about Golisha, a girl who goes in search of herself and of her father, and her encounter with the sieve, and her role in their eschatology. But what and who are these sieve? They are an entire people of artificial humans to whom an embryologist named Don Ello has given life in order to preserve the myths and traditions of a book called La Nouvelle, which recounts the myths and legends of his homeland, a place called Cana, in a planet called La Première Terre, the first Earth. Since the people of Cana were under the threat of destruction, Don Ello literally gave life to the wonderful characters and stories of La Nouvelle by creating the Sieve, synthetic creatures that have the personalities, feelings, and memories of the personages of the aforementioned novel, and this is the idea of the preservation of memory, because in other words, Don Ello has created the Sieve in order to preserve the traditions and rituals and legends of Cana, and also of all the other traditions of his planet too. So this is Don Ello. And as you can see, Attali is playing a pun with the name. So you have Don for Adonai, Ello for Elohim. And La Nouvelle is a transposition of the Pentateuch, so the books of Moses. So this idea of the preservation of memory and the preservation of tradition. So, so here you have the models from whom Attali and the narrative is drawing from. So they got the Pentateuch, but you also have the sacred books of Judaism, like Cabalistic, in the Cabalistic tradition, Kabbalah, we should remember it does mean tradition, as Gershom Scholem also points out. So the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation or of creation, the Zohar, history, and also the entirety of the myths of humankind. It should be pointed out that there's also a reference to Hinduism with the avatars of Lord Vishnu at some point in the book. So Attali does really care about all of the myths of mankind, and not just a few. The sieve had two characteristics. Not only are they exact copies of a pre-existing mythical model, basically these embryologists gave life to the characters of myth, but they die 3 days after the birth of their child, and their child is an exact double of the mother or father, depending on the gender of the child, as you can see in this slide here. The book is quite complex, so of course it's a bit awkward to condense it into a short presentation, but I'll seek to do my best. And this all leads me of the question of today. Are the sieve replicants as they look like human beings, but they really are artificial creatures crafted by a man whose names recall the names of God, or are they golems, as they are often referred to in the novel? Of course, when I use the term replicant, I'm referring to the science fiction noir film Blade Runner. My contention is that the main thing that a sieve and a replicant would have in common is that they both look exactly like humans. However, it is in the comparison of their differences that one would understand the originality of Attali's creation and message. In fact, as you see in the following diagram, the sieve and replicants share three main things: limited lifespans, a memory that comes from another source, an obsession with life. In fact, while the sieve are designed to die at the birth of their double, replicants are designed not to last longer than 4 years, as they might develop emotional responses that will make the void kampf test useless, and thus make them undistinguishable from humans. Moreover, both sieve and replicants have implanted memories, but the former are able to reproduce and transmit the memories of their models, biblical characters or otherwise, to their children. The latter have memory implants, the replicants, in order to make them more human than human, as it were, as in the case of the replicant called Rachel. Lastly, if on the one hand, the replicants have a need for more life as they strive to survive in a world that wants them dead, as are outlaws on Earth, the sieve are concerned with an event called the Uve, which will stop the death command of their genes, will enable them to enter the legends of mankind. Here one can see how Attali mixes science fiction themes with eschatological hope and a stress on the importance of a mythical heritage. The stress on life can be seen in the second question I want to ask today, that is, whether the sieve are not just peculiar kinds of replicants, but if they are golems. I would like, therefore, to briefly introduce the golem myth before I reveal why the sieve can be regarded as golems and what this means for Jacques Attali. So, what we're talking about the creation of life. We're talking about a magical creation of life, because this is the creation of a magical man, a man made of clay. Let's look at the next slide, because this may be interesting for our discourses of today. So in his book on the Kabbalah and symbolism, the great scholar of Judaism, Gershom Scholem, tells us that the golem is a telluric myth. He indicates that there is a midrash that talks about the creation of Adam in Genesis, where God, in order to create the first man, used not just earth, but the best possible earth. Indeed, we must also remember that the etymology of Adam, Adama in Hebrew, means earth. In the only place where the word golem is actually to be found in the Bible, which is Psalm 139.16, we see that the word golem means shapeless and amorphous. Scholem further suggests that before life was infused into Adam by God, he's called golem with the meaning of earth that has not taken shape yet. Moreover, there is a midrash in which Adam is defined as a golem of cosmic dimensions that has shown to God all the future generations up until the end of time, before he was even able to move or talk. The motif of the burst earth and the one of the inherent power of Adam in his golem state points to the importance of the telluric identity of the first man. The power inherent in the earth is, of course, the power to create life, along with the power which is inherent in life itself. The golem motif is also related to the mysterious combination of the Hebrew letters, as you see in this slide, that have the power to create life, according to Cabalistic texts like the Sefer Yetzirah, as I mentioned before, the book of formation or creation, and the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, where God created the world with the bet. So the idea is that the beginning of Genesis in Hebrew would be Bereshit bara Elohim. And according to Cabalistic text, Zohar, the idea is not that God created the world, but that God created that something created God with it, and it is the bet, which is the first letter of Bereshit, which is the very beginning of Genesis. These texts are more than just hypotext. Attali has always in mind when he was writing La Vie éternelle, as one of them is even presented as a book within the book called the SY, which are of course the initials of the Sefer Yetzirah. Finally, the golem and his creation doesn't just belong with the Cabalistic books and ancient Midrashim, but you can find in the famous stories of Rabbi Lo, the Maharal of Prague, who created the golem in order to defend the Jewish population of the ghetto and gave it life with the power of the word emet, which means truth in Hebrew, and took life away by cancelling the E from his forehead, thereby turning emet into meth, death. So this, of course, talks about, defines the power of the Hebrew letters, as it was mentioned before, even though in passing. And there are numerous other stories in rabbinic and German literature. We don't have time to talk about this today, unfortunately. Jacques Attali himself, in an interview with Mark de Schmet, talks about the power of the letters of the alphabet in light of how the universe can be seen structured as language. So I shall read this passage for you, since the time is not ungenerous with me right now. The SY is also the first text in the history of thought to have made the hypothesis that the world can be explained like a language, which is a way of saying that language is the only possible model and a model that leads to a discovery. It, the SY of course, says clearly that the world is structured as a language. This led rabbis to think that life as well can be explained by the letters of the alphabet. The SY thus contains the intuition that we find in modern sciences. For instance, in the works of Chomsky on linguistics, of Wittgenstein on logic, and of Watson on genetics. Man can explain the universe with language because language is an unvaried gene, isomorphic with those of the universe. So the question that I have now is how the silver golems then, just because they epitomize the motif of the creation of life throughout the entire book, I mean, along with several references to Jewish mysticism and the Kabbalah. Probably it is the case, but the real answer comes at the very end of the book. My initial question was in fact rhetorical. Whether the sieve are replicants or golems or both is not as relevant as the message of the novel, embodied in the idea of the life of words. So here we have, like what we said up until now, the preservation of memory, but we also have two other points: the importance of differentiation and the centrality of myth in La Vie éternelle. So these three main points inform Attali's message of the life of words. The first is the preservation of memory, which is seen as magical / artificial beings that enact our traditions. The second is the life of words, which can be regarded as the life of civilizations that are, in Attali's words, like living species. Attali said to me the second time I met him that civilization is like a living species. In order to preserve the latter, it is necessary not to lose the ability to differentiate, as we shall see in the following passage. In my translation, of course. Do you know the name of your mother's bird? Yes, it's called Donolo. Why do you ask? No, Donolo is the name your mother gave it a long time ago. What I ask, he said after a long silence, is the name of his family, if you prefer, the one of his race. I don't know, but what for? The other day you said to me that amongst men, races have no importance. Isn't it the same thing with birds? It's true, in order to judge them, it has no importance, but it is very important to understand them. Donolo is a lorry, and the lorries are strange birds. I would want you to learn how to distinguish them. To distinguish is already to respect. A civilization dies if it no longer is capable of distinguishing. So this is a very, very important message. And when I interviewed Jacques Attali in February 2010, we talk about different things. We also talk about genocide, as it was mentioned before in my presentation of today. The civ die because they're killed in an atomic bomb, which is a reference to one of the horrors of the 20th century, the atomic bomb, but also to the Shoah, because they represent not exclusively, but mainly the Jewish people, where we also talk about the issue of differentiation. And this is what my question was. I was referring to the passages just quoted. I'll just read to you since it looks like I have enough time to finish. There is a passage, sorry, in particular that struck my imagination and perhaps that of many readers. I'm referring to the dialogue between Tula and Golisha. And when Tula says that a civilization dies if it loses the ability to distinguish. I would say that this message is still valid now. I believe this is about an implosion of perspective and an ability to integrate other cultures, which inevitably results in racism. In the past, I referred to this phenomenon in terms of undifferentiation, namely the inability to distinguish the ontological differences amongst things. This is what I wrote in my PhD thesis, actually. And I would say that such loss of perspective leads to the demise of culture, as without culture, civilization cannot survive. What would you elaborate, or would you please elaborate what you mean by a civilization that dies when it loses its ability to distinguish? And Attali was very kind to say this to me. He said, that is a very important point, because we need first to think that people are united, and it is important to accept and to push the idea that all of us are the same. Only one mankind, only one human species. But it's also important to accept that differentiation is fundamental. You can have differences which are not inequalities, as each of us is different from the other. And these differences are fundamental because we are the heirs of different cultures and different ways of understanding the world. I consider this to be a treasure. Mankind would be terribly weakened if we lost the differences, but the differences should not become antagonization. So Attali, I think I don't have to explain this, is making a very thorough and very good point, at least in my opinion. And furthermore, we can actually finally talk about the meaning of the life rewards as a way to posit the centrality of myth stories and the written word in our lives. And I would like, sorry?
You should be finishing in 1 minute, please.
Okay, so I'll just show the slides and read very briefly within 1 minute. So basically, what Sally is talking about here is that the golem is a myth, and not that the myth is a golem. That words, I'm reading at the bottom of the page, as perhaps the real golems, made of the clay of letters, is with them that myths are betrothed to eternity. And that letters, words, languages, and written works and myths are more alive than any other creation of man, because it is the life of words that the Cabalistic tradition was talking about within the book, portrayed in the book. And that letters, words, languages, written works, and myths are more alive than any other creation of man. Thank you very much.
Metka, how did you get interested in this book by Attali?
Well, for personal reasons, because it's actually the book of my adolescence. It was given to me by my mother, and I was very fond of my mother. She was an intellectual, and she was very interested in Judaism. This is why she gave me a Jewish name. And when she gave me La Vie Éternelle in the Italian version, because La Vie Éternelle has been translated into Italian and Spanish, perhaps in Portuguese as well, but never into English. Actually, Attali wanted me to translate it into English. Hopefully I'll do it one day. That is an ongoing project. But certainly, it really touched my heart when I was 17. And when I decided to do my PhD, I thought La Vie Éternelle would be a good choice, and I juxtapose it to the Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. So for personal reasons, that would be my answer.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you about this many-faced novel. Have you studied the relationship between the doppelganger, and the double, and the replicants, and what is the part of freedom in this book, because everything is related with memory and prophecy. What part is allotted to freedom in this book?
To deceive themselves, I think they save, actually, I know they save, they have memories of other lives. But these memories are not always that manifest. So there is a degree of freedom that they have in their choices. But since they believe in prophecy, in a prophecy called the UV, which I don't have to mention in my presentation because time was short, basically this prophecy is about a person, a woman, who is half Siv, half human. And the moment that she takes her place in the novel, in the Pentateuch, everything will come true, and they will stop dying at the birth of the double, and they will gain such freedom. So prophecy itself is somewhat conducive to some future freedom, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Christina Doku, if the word is creative power and identity conferral, doesn't the question of golem versus... Can you read the question?
Me?
I mean, there's a chat. I can ask you, if the word is creative power and identity conferral, doesn't the question of golems versus replicants matter? So not so much because of the differences between the creation of the two species, but because of ultimately who controls the literacy of those subjects?
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, the question was a rhetorical. The question was a bridge to go to the message of La Vie éternelle. I don't think it matters whether they are just replicants or just golems. What matters is Jacques Attali's ability to withdraw from different sources and to produce a consistent message. So it is irrelevant to whether they are golems or replicants or both or a bit of both. What matters is how the message is conveyed, I think.